All right. Hello, hello, hello. We are here. We are back. Hello, Black Psychiatry fam. It is me, your host, your moderator here, back again. I know I was gone, but I'm happy that I am back here moderating with all of you. And tonight we have we always have an all-star panel, but we have a super all-star panel because it is everyone is connected or a part or alumni or currently working at the real HU, Howard University. So we are all coming to you live from the one and only, the Mecca, Howard University. We are all either faculty, alumni, or somehow still working. I don't know how they got us to do that. Still working here at Howard University. So welcome to another installment of At Black Psychiatry. Thank you for joining us. We hope that we get a lot of participation and a lot of questions. So we know some of you might be out in the streets, still look at us on YouTube on your mobile device, but we are getting ready to talk about returning to the new normal. What is normal? What is going on? What is it going to be like returning to campus? If you don't know, the students are back here at Howard University. I have seen them. I don't know if you've seen them on Instagram. It's been a lot. They've had a lot of gatherings and not too much social distancing, but returning to campus, returning to work, returning to everything. So we're calling this the return and the return to normal, whatever that will be now. A lot of people like to act like the pandemic is over. We're going to talk about how this is impacting our mental health, how vaccination hesitation is impacting our mental health. So we have an all-star panel here, all Howard. Also remember that if you are in Washington, D.C., or a healthcare worker, period, throughout the city, throughout the country, we are offering mental health services for you through the Department of Behavioral Health, our partner, and the Howard R&R Project. So we will put that up for you, a link. If you need help, reach out for help. We are giving you free help. It's not necessarily Dr. Harrison that you're going to see. I just want to clarify. We had some confusion about that last week, but we do have free services, and we are going to make sure that we help you as best as we can through this partnership between the Department of Behavioral Health and Howard University R&R Project. So I would like to start and introduce you to our wonderful panelists here. Can everyone see them? Okay, wonderful. So we have, in no particular order because they're all wonderful, we have Monty Bush, who is a social worker, and she is part of our Howard's In School program, and she's also a parent sending a child, possibly, I don't know, Monty, you'll have to tell us, two children possibly back into these COVID somewhat vaccinated streets and schools. I hope they have masks. Let me know. I'll get them some kid ones or whatever we need. Okay, so they have masks. Okay, good. So welcome, Monty. We also have here Amanat, who is one of our medical students at the real HUCM. So welcome, Amanat. She is a second-year medical student. She's actually one of the only students who started off their whole medical career virtually. And this is actually her first time now seeing her classmates in person, and faculty, and even the building for campus. So welcome, Amanat, and we're going to hear all about that. We also have a Howard alum. Now, she did go to GW for medical school. We tried to forgive her for that, but she is now back as one of my residents, a wonderful mom and doctor who is here with us, Dr. Yashikia Woodford, who started residency actually in the middle of a pandemic as an intern, and she'll tell us how she handled that and what kind of impact that has on your mental health as well. So welcome, Yashikia. And we have, last but not least, we have Dr. Kendall Moody, who is similar to myself, a young, new, fresh faculty member here at Howard University. So welcome as well, Kendall. And he actually, I stalk him. So he has done a paper recently that talked about stress and its impact on children and adolescents. And if we haven't gone through any other stress, we know we've gone through some stress in the last 18 months. So we are excited to get into it. Are my panelists ready? Yes, they are ready. Well, I'm looking at them. They look ready. We have questions for you, but as always, participants, you can put your questions in the chat. We will ask them. You can send it either on Facebook or YouTube, and we will get those answered. But my first question that I really have to know is, as we get ready to go back, as we get ready to enter campus, as we get ready to enter schools, be it virtually or in person for children, as we get ready to go back to work. I know some Howard faculty have been at home forever. Not me, though. I would like to know, and I need to ask you all, what's your advice as we're going back? Are you going back? Are all of y'all in person? Are your kids going back? What is your advice, or where is, even before I get to the advice, what's your mindset as we return to normal? Dr. Bush, Monty Bush, I'm gonna hit you with that.
Something into existence, huh? So I work for the school-based behavioral health program at Howard. So I have it from all ends, right? I'm a parent of 15-year-old twins. So they are both going back in person. We are back as of this week, supporting DCPS. Shout out to all the DCPS teachers who have been back since February and those who are going back now. And it's tough, right? There's a lot of anxiety around what this school year will look like, around what to expect, around those changes in schedules, about how to balance everything. And the biggest piece of advice that I have is to talk about it, right? I mean, some of this stuff is just not going to work itself out until you do it, until you get into a groove and get into that new normal. But I think you acknowledge that anxiety, you acknowledge those fears, you talk about it, you make a plan to help address some of those things that you're going through, and then you put one foot in front of the other.
Thank you, Monty. It's like you've already been a part of the Black Psychiatry fam, because it is definitely something that we like to emphasize here, that we have to talk about these things. If you keep it to yourself, if you don't address it, the anxiety, the depression, even the trauma continues to build up. Dr. Kendall, what do you have to say about returning? I know you might have started off as a virtual professor.
Yes, I did. I started off, I joined the Howard Faculty School of Social Work. So shout out to the School of Social Work. I joined in 2020 in the height of the pandemic, and that was virtual. And that took some adjusting. So now that I was adjusting to being virtual, now we all of a sudden have to come back. And I think I'd have to echo what Monty was saying about the anxiety that surrounds this notion that we have to go back to normal when we really aren't back to normal. We're still in the thick of COVID-19. And if we can just acknowledge how crippling anxiety is, it stops you from engaging activities that you would normally engage in, and it stops you from eating, sleeping. You think about this all the time. How am I going to be safe? How am I going to keep my students safe? Because now I have 20 kids, I won't call them kids, 20 students in one of my classes. So how am I going to keep them safe? Also giving them the in-person learning that they deserve. So I have to, again, echo what Monty was saying. Talk with your administrators about how are they going to keep you safe? How are they going to keep the staff safe? What measures, what are they implementing to keep us safe as we return to normal, quote unquote normal?
True, yes, quote unquote normal. And I think that we really need to address, like, what is normal? Is there a normal? What is the new normal like? What is it? I know that some of us faculty members got an email that said they're going to keep you safe by making sure you get a vaccination, and you better turn it in and upload it to our new system, or you're going to be in trouble. But that's the Howard way. Dr. Yashikia Woodford, tell me, what was it like starting off your physician career as in the middle of a pandemic? And has it gotten easier? Is it normal now? What's happening?
So I will say it was a huge transition, going from being a medical student during the pandemic to now a physician during the pandemic. And there's already a steep learning curve from the time that you leave medical school and enter residency. So for me, there was that component, but also I was a new parent during a pandemic. I have a 2-year-old. I was a wife during the start of a pandemic, as well as now a physician and then a Black woman. So there are many different facets that different dynamics to just me starting off my journey, my medical journey as a doctor during a pandemic. The biggest things for me, I would say, was having to go into work and feel vulnerable in a sense of, we mentioned anxiety here, but sometimes that anxiety even spirals into depression when things start to become very difficult for you to manage. I feel like for me, I struggled with some of the transition because at this point I have my heartbeat walking around during a pandemic. I have my husband as well, that role. And then now I'm caring for someone else's loved ones, and those decisions fall onto me as well as our team. So seeing it firsthand, it really taught me that you have to be present in the moment, in the role that you're in. So we wear many different hats, but it's really important for us to, really sit and be in that moment and address the things that are going on there and fully appreciate them, being more aware. So I think for this pandemic, I learned, be fully present, acknowledge your feelings, acknowledge what's hard, what's tough. When you're anxious, it's okay to talk to people about your anxiety. So it's been a very difficult transition, but I think it's been one that's been helpful with me really getting in touch with and being more intentional about my mental health.
That's my resident, y'all. Okay, yes, great job. Great answer. And Aminat, tell me, because I really have no idea, even though I was one of the faculty members who pushed that I did not want y'all to come on campus, because if the pandemic took us all out, y'all still needed to be safe so you could be the next wave of physicians here. But Aminat, tell me, what was it like having a whole year of medical school virtually, and just the importance of connection and networking with your classmates and with your teachers and your educators? It just really is a glue in medical school and medical education. So what was it like? What was the impact on your mental health? Tell me about that.
To be completely honest, it was a very taxing and isolating experience. A lot of times you hear, medical school, the learning process is a team sport. You have to lean on, your other classmates and upperclassmen and things like that just to make it through. And a lot of times you see the bonds that so many other people have built with their classmates just off of the strength of going through med school and going through that struggle. But because we were in the pandemic, essentially you were on your own. You really didn't have very many people to turn to and talk to during this time. So it was very difficult. I honestly felt very disconnected. But, I finally got to meet some of my classmates. Maybe about 2 months ago, I met a good chunk of my classmates. So we're getting back into the groove of things now. But at the height of the pandemic, it was definitely a very taxing experience.
I appreciate that transparency. And medical school is tough, period. And then to do it alone and feel isolated, I can't even imagine what that was like. And is that the normal? Is it normal for us to now have this feelings of normalizing isolation, that we are alone, or what can we really do? So Monty, I know that you work with the teachers and the students, and you work with our educational program here in school-based learning and mental health care. What is it going to be like for teachers who, I know our DC teachers have been back, but all around the country, everyone hasn't been back. What is going to be like for teachers going back? Are they anxious? Are they just okay, cool? Is it just normal for them now? Are they going to have these shields and dividers? How are they going to make it through? What do you think?
So I think it's going to look different for everyone, but for sure there is a lot of anxiety. I did a kind of a Q&A with some of the teachers at my school earlier this year, because DCPS did offer some in-person learning starting in February of this year. And so we do have a cohort of teachers who kind of went through the anxiety of feeling all the feelings before returning to school and then kind of settling in. Of course, that was different because it was a fraction of the student body. And now they're going to have totally in-person learning this fall. But there's a lot of anxiety and there's still a lot of questions to be answered. Not everyone knows exactly what all of the policies are to keep them safe. I haven't seen a lot of face shields. There's a lot of masking, but some of that has been inconsistent among the student body. There's still a lot of questions to be answered. So again, that's why we're encouraging a lot of communication. And I do think that the leadership has done a really good job of trying to facilitate that communication with teachers and encourage them to ask questions and to talk about their concerns. So shout out to the leadership. But I think to answer your question directly, it's going to look different across the country. And as we can see, just the general pandemic response from state to state is so different. We just don't know what that's going to look like yet quite in schools.
It's definitely different because we know that some places are like their own country down Florida and
Texas.
Louisiana. I love New Orleans, but Louisiana, you're there too. So Dr. Kendall, we've talked about how we're trying to adjust, how our students are trying to adjust. But what's the adjustment like for educators, especially in higher education, where for almost 2 years, people have been teaching behind a computer screen. They haven't even had to see anyone or walk by anyone. But now the students are here. I see them. I'm trying to drive down 6th Street, so I know that they are here. But at campuses across the country, what is it like for educators who have spent so much time behind the screen, now coming away from the computers, and also who have their own anxieties and worries, especially when people and many children and young adults are not vaccinated?
Right. Yeah. And a lot of educators are nervous. They're anxious about thinking about things that they never had to think about before. Having hand sanitizer in the room, for example, maybe, or even wiping down the desk before and after class. So these are things that you don't typically have to think about as an educator. Your focus is, how am I going to deliver this lecture to my students so that they can take whatever the lecture I'm teaching into their everyday work environment. So you have to retrain your brain to think outside of the box in these situations, and it's difficult. It's something that we're not trained to do as educators, but you also, as a decent human being, have to think about the lives of others as you're in this classroom and you're teaching students face to face. Of course, we're all wearing masks, and you try to listen to our leadership on how to mitigate risk. But for example, some students may say, hey, if I'm not feeling well, but I feel like I can participate in class, and I Zoom into the classroom, and we're still trying to get guidance on that. So it's things that we don't typically have to think about when we're educating, but now we do have to think about how to keep our students safe. And it's a real anxiety provoking. I'm wiping down my desk before class, after class, and wiping down my desk. So hey, don't pass the paper around for everyone's emails. Is that going to increase risk? Normal things that we would typically do, but we have to think about the safety of everyone else now.
That's correct. I think that that's something we all have to think about. Like if someone is saying that they're not feeling well, can they Zoom in? Do they have to be in person? We have to be there. Like what are the accommodations going to be? Now for my residents, if y'all say you're sick, just stay away from me. Okay. You say you're sick, just send me an email. Don't look at me. Don't come in just to check in with me. You're sick. Stay over there with your sickness. I'm going to send you all the good vibes, but no, don't come in, because again, we have a young psychiatric workforce here, and we need all of them, and we need our students, and we need our residents well. So I don't want anything taking them out or me out. But Dr. Woodford, Yashikia, what do you think is really causing the most stress now as we try to return to normal? Is it that there is no normal? Is it that there's still the risk? You don't know who's going to wear their mask every day, who's going to be vaccinated, if you're on the train, if you're walking down the street. Where do you think the most stress is coming from for our mental health, especially in our Black communities?
I would say that it's a combination of all those things you just mentioned. It's, is this a new normal? Can we even consider this normal? In terms of, someone wearing a mask, people that have never experienced anxiety are experiencing that for the first time. That anxiety may also, like I was saying before, may lead to depression, or people may be depressed about not being able to socialize with loved ones, not being able to get out and just exist in a sense of being concerned about wearing a mask when they go out, or being concerned about contracting the virus that they really don't fully understand. So I would say that it's certainly all of the above, as well as us trying to figure out how to cope with things. Not everyone, mental health does not discriminate. So it crosses all facets of not only health, but just everybody in all populations. So I think that, like how you mentioned before, what is it? It's all of it. It's everything. So it's a combination.
Thank you for that. And I mean, I know you alluded to this a little bit earlier, but how do you feel that this new normal has impacted your education, your medical education? And I know we talked about like the bonding, but how do you feel like it's impacted your education? And if you feel like you can talk about your mental health period.
I think in terms of my mental health, this is like a very anxious time for me, because there's just so much uncertainty around the way we have navigated this pandemic collectively as a society. So it's kind of like, on one hand, I'm trying to get back into the groove of, I guess, what could be considered the new normal, but at the same time, with new cases emerging and increasing numbers of people affected, it's also do I have to mentally prepare myself to kind of go back into isolation and shut down? And then in terms of my education, I do appreciate the way in which Howard has gone to just ensure that, we're all okay. We're still receiving the same standard education. And our professors are doing a lot to help us, but it's just a very anxious time right now, with just how everything is just uncertain at the moment.
I think I see everyone nodding their heads, because I think for all of us, everything is uncertain, and no matter what facet or realm we're in, be it a student, a resident, campus life, supporting educators, being an educator, and supervisors as well. So I've got questions coming at me all around. Okay, we got good questions coming in. So Monty, I wanted to ask you though, we supposedly made strides in the last 18 months, right, with mental health, with talking about it, with being more open. You see more posts on social media, people saying this, walking away from jobs and positions. Some of us don't have that luxury or that ability to do that. So supposedly strides have been made, but how can educators, no matter what level, how can they continue to protect their own mental health and really set up boundaries while they have to return to inpatient education and teaching? What can they do to protect themselves and preserve their mental health?
Well, so the first thing is, I think you need to make sure your no game is strong. Right. One of the things that people really exercised during this pandemic was.
Can you say that again? Can you say that again? We got to
make sure your no game is strong. Okay. I think a lot of what we suffered from prior to the pandemic was feeling obligated to show up in spaces that didn't really serve our mental health. Right. And I think because there was a collective stress experienced during the pandemic that we are experiencing during the pandemic, people feel a little bit better about saying, yeah, no, can't do that, right? And I think that boundaries never feel quite comfortable, because I think we live in a society where we're expected to say yes all the time. But I think there are some things that we got to do, right? We got to put food on the table. Many of us, like you said, we don't have the luxury of not showing up to work. Although I think it's wonderful that people have been able to set some standards for the way that they should be treated and compensated for what they do. But that being said, make sure your no game is strong, right? Where you can say no, say no. Set those boundaries to serve your mental health. When you need to rest, rest. If it serves you to not show up, don't show up to those spaces when you need a minute to kind of be able to relax and take care of it.
Yes, I think I frequently say saying no to others is saying yes to yourself. Now, for Amina and Dr. Woodford, don't get too carried away with saying no over here to your attending your faculty, because you got to learn, you got to do some training and education. So don't get too carried away. Dr. Kendall, I know that you have written a paper about this, and I was cheering on you and stalking your paper from afar. But you talked about the impact of stress, parent stress on children. Now, I don't know any other time that's been much more stressful than this. Well, that I know of. I'm sure for our parents, of course, we've gone through enslavement and civil rights and things, but a collective community of going through the stress that's impacting your families, your children. What is it like for our Black kids? What are they going through when they're seeing their parents going through this stress and these struggling, everything from going to work to losing your job to not being able to secure rent? What is happening with our kids?
Yes, and that's a really good question. Our children feel that they absorb the anxiety from their parents. And I can speak from personal experience. I can remember growing up, and I can actually remember feeling how I was raising my grandmother, and feeling how when she came into the door, I can feel the type of day that she had. Right, I felt it as soon as she came into the door. The same way with these children now, they feel the stress that these parents are going through, and I can understand the stress. They have a big responsibility, taking care of their family, having to go to work in the middle of a pandemic, having to provide for their children while keeping their children safe. And I have a 7-month-old here at the house, and I think about him and my fiance when I go to work every day, and having to interact with students and making sure I'm keeping them safe as well. But also, I know we have an obligation to fulfill being educators. So it's a battle. It's a battle, and an internal battle. So I understand it. But to answer your question, children do feel that stress, and they will verbalize it. So I think it's important for parents to have these conversations with their children, open conversation. Hey, how do you feel about going to school? How do you feel about what's going on today and what you're reading on social media? Because they're sponges. They soak in everything. They're receiving all these messages, and everything is telling them, whoa, you need to be worried about this. However, children don't really know how to cope. At least some children don't know how to cope with the anxiety of the pandemic, the anxiety of everything that's happening in the world. So having these conversations with children is really important, because if not, it'll start to come out in different areas of their life. So it's really important to have these conversations early.
Definitely. So thank you for that. I knew you were the expert who was going to get into it for us. My next question is for any of you who happen to be parents, not me, any of you who happen to be parents, or just also for you, Monty and Dr. Kendall and Dr. Woodford, I'm interested in your opinion about this too. What would be your advice to a parent who is struggling with trying to decide, should I send my child back to in-person learning? Should I keep them virtual? This is something that people ask me, who know I'm a physician and know I'm a psychiatrist. They ask me, just like when I'm getting my hair done or my lashes, like, well, do you think that I should be sending my kid back? And I'm like, I don't know. So what is your advice from you all? And I'm not, if you have advice as well, let me know, for people who are struggling and try to decide if they should send their kids or keep them at home. It's a difficult decision.
I'll say I think it's an individual decision. Different children have different needs, right? Like some children have really suffered with isolation during this pandemic. And some parents, even when they weren't totally comfortable, have made kind of the tough decision to send their children back because they needed to be concerned about their mental health. For some parents, some children have really thrived in this pandemic. I mean, being able to establish their own routine, being at home, being autonomous, right? Being able to get up and do the things that they needed to do on their own. Every situation is going to be different. And what I tell parents is that you are the expert on yourself and your child, right? Mm-hmm. So you know what your child needs. Trust your instinct as a parent. Talk to your children, obviously in an age appropriate way. The way you talk to a 5-year-old is going to be different than, like, for example, the way that I talk to my children, who I have 15-year-old twins. So I involve them in that decision making, right? And being able to see kind of where they feel like the deficits are, what they feel like they need. And we try to make decisions together as a family that we think suit the needs of all of the members of our family, my husband and my children together.
I agree. If I can jump in here, it's each case is different, and I believe you have to weigh your options and what's best for your family. Of course, as a parent, naturally you want to keep your children safe, right? But also as a parent, you also have this feeling of needing to provide for your family. So a situation involving a 2-parent household where one parent is working from home and they have a 9-year-old child is going to be very different than a single parent household with a 9-year-old child who they're asking the parent to come back to work. They can't have the child stay. They may not be able to have the child stay at home in virtual learning environment. They may have to seek childcare or an alternative. So each case is different. And I think you would have to weigh what's best for your family while keeping your family safe. I think that's the most important take-home message, is that you have to keep your family safe. Nothing's worse, or nothing is, you shouldn't put them at risk. You think about what's best for your family. It won't be worth it to send your child to an environment where now they're sick and you have to care for them in a hospital. It's just not worth it.
I would agree with what everyone else said about it's very individual, it's dependent on each household, each family, each personality of each parent, each child. Every child's going to be different. I would also say now's the time to lean on your village. We call it social distancing, but truly, it's physical distancing, and we need to rely on other people that are able to help us cope with. I'm not okay with sending my baby to school, but this is what he needs right now. So I think right now is a time, even when we're trying to make decisions about making sure our family and our children are safe, that we're also making sure that our mental health is protected by reaching out to our loved ones and expressing how we feel about our kids being out or our kids being home, and just how we feel about it.
I would also be remiss, I'm sorry, if I didn't mention, a lot of DC parents do not have a choice. They have to send their children back in person. It's been a really big topic. There are petitions going around everywhere. But parents of DCPS children have to send their children back to school this year. And a lot of parents are not comfortable with that, but there is no hybrid option or virtual option for those parents this year.
Right. And if they don't have the resources or the funds or the coins, if you will, to pay for this pod education, they really are left with no choice. So it is, all of your answers were wonderful. I'm just here yes. Amina and Dr. Whitford, tell me, so I am obviously an educator, also a physician, and also a supervisor. What advice would you have for a supervisor, because you all have been transitioned in from totally virtual as medical students to now still a mix as a medical student, and now a totally in person with a little bit of virtual training. Dr. Whitford, what is your advice, or what should supervisors know as we are trying to bring people back into the new normal, normalizing something that is just not normal and acting like this is just the way things are? What's your advice as we try to, for leaders, be it in education or employers, how to bring people back into this space?
I would say being open and aware that as an educator, we have all different types of learners. Not everyone is going to respond the same in terms of learning virtually or even being in person. And the transition, everyone doesn't transition the same that we would anticipate or we expect. So being open and allowing them grace when they do come back to work, making mental health a priority for um, those you're educating, your employees, as well as being flexible, and then checking in, seeing how the pandemic is affecting their lives, their everyday, regular check-ins, just making sure that you are acknowledging where people are at during this time period. And I think you do a good job of that, Dr. Harrison. But I would say that those are some of the most important things with people coming back to work.
Thank you. I guess I will keep you on board. You're not going to be fired. I did not hear. Okay. Not. What do you think? What should we know? What should leadership know? What should employers know as they bring people back into this new normal?
Like, one thing I appreciated about what Dr. Woodford said was grace. Like, I think before the pandemic, everything was go, go, go. Everything was very automated. It was like everyone just fell in line and just did whatever, especially like, to secure the job and do what they have to do. But I think now, because of the pandemic, like, the best thing to do is like give people some grace and realize, not everybody can or will be able to just bounce back and get back to whatever normalcy there was prior to the pandemic, and like just checking in and acknowledging that, this was a tough year for people. So like mental health is really important, talking to people about how they feel about even coming in, and, just kind of allowing people to do a hybrid situation if possible. So that way, like, everyone can make sure that their mental health is in check. I think that's something that's very important.
Oh, definitely agreed on that. I'm not already so wise as a little medical student over there. All right, so we have a lot of comments and a lot of questions over here. I'm going to ask you one more of my questions, and I'm going to get straight away to the audience questions. But Monty, you talked about speaking openly with children. You talked about having these conversations, as well as Dr. Kendall. How do these conversations look? How do we start them? Do I just come in and say, "Hey, kid, like, how are you feeling?" Or how do we start these conversations? How do we end them? How do we continue them? What does that look like?
I mean, you could do that. I try to touch bases with my kids daily, which has been a lot easier actually during COVID, because we can start these conversations organically. It hasn't looked as much like my coming home from school or coming home from work and trying to jam it all into the evening. I can notice changes in their body language. I can notice, if something happens that day, I can simply just ask them how they feel about it. A lot of the topic of conversation, obviously, recently has been around going back to school. How do you feel about it, right? The Delta variant is emerging. What do you know about it? Do you have questions? The topic of vaccination came up as soon as they were eligible. Are you nervous about it? Do you have, any reservations about getting the vaccine? I mean, I think starting with asking questions and making yourself available, which, like I said, during the pandemic has been amazing, because we're busy, right? And so it becomes difficult to make yourself available just for things to come up. But while I've been able to work from home and be with my kids so often, things can just come up. And then I can kind of really tune in and pay attention to how they say things, verbally and non-verbally, how they're feeling, and really start the conversation from there.
That's an excellent point. I don't have much more to add. I was so you put it out there. I mean, as you said, every kid is different. I think you said earlier too, Monty, is that parents are the experts here. They know their child. Some children, as soon as you ask them the question, they're like, "Oh, I've been waiting to tell you." Just waiting for that moment, and they'll have, this sort of, the term is diarrhea of the mouth, to sort of come out with everything. However, some children are a little bit more reserved and guarded and aloof. They don't want to. It takes a little bit for them to talk about these vulnerable moments. So leaving yourself open to whenever they're ready to talk about it, you're there to answer the questions. Some techniques that I give some of my clinicians is, if they have a child who they're trying to build a relationship with and they're not really open in talking with you, what are some ways in which you can bring down those defenses? And then those are the moments, once those defenses come down a bit, having those vulnerable conversations, because they know they're in a safe environment and they can talk with their parents or the clinician about how they're feeling. But I believe every child is different. Parents are the expert. When your child's behavior is changing. When they used to come home and they were jovial, laughy, now they come home and they're a little bit more somber and guarded, self-isolating. So your child. So pay attention to those behaviors. And if you notice that your child's behaviors are changing, those are the moments where you have to talk with your child about what they're feeling, because they may not be able to articulate it. So.
True. I agree. All right, I'm going to get into some of these audience questions over here. So a question that we have from Mary Hall is, what advice do you all give to your children, or I guess children that you see, about mask wearing when their peers are so adamant about not wearing them? Is this a new kind of peer pressure? So I will have to say, before I let my lovely panelists take over, that I was reading about this actually on Twitter yesterday, and many educators were commenting that it's not the kids who have a problem with wearing their masks. They were saying that their first graders, their second graders are able to wear their masks all day. They go through it. They might need to be reminded to put it back up, but it's really the parents that they've seen have the problems with masks. So I guess it's twofold. What advice do you give to children about this? And is it a new type of peer pressure? Or do you really think that it's the parents who are controlling this, like, mask, I don't know, can we say now mask hesitancy or mask anxiety? What do the panelists think? Any of you? Sorry.
I definitely think that in most cases it's the parents. The way I approach it is just fact-based, right? We go over the science of mask wearing. We go over how it protects you, and what happens like if you don't have your mask on, right? How long it takes for you to be exposed. We just try to go over the facts. And I think I approach it similarly to the way that I would approach a lot of things with 15-year-olds, right? Because a lot of it is about peer pressure, about what friends are doing, about the social norms. And we talk about kind of being able to stand out in the right ways. I'm okay if you don't necessarily agree with me, but I want to make sure that you're making educated and informed decisions that aren't based on what your friend thinks, but are really reflective of your own values. Now, obviously, the way that you're going to deal with a 5 or 6 or 7-year-old is going to be very different, again, than the way that you would deal with 15-year-olds like I have. It was probably a little bit more like, yeah, we wear masks for ourselves and also for other people, tapping into maybe some of that empathy when they were a little bit younger and couldn't understand some of the science, right? The technical aspects of why we do some of the things that we do. So, at that point, I would probably tap into a little bit more of the values that we're trying to reflect in our behavior and why we choose that behavior when they're a little bit younger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in my experience, I haven't come across too many children who are totally against wearing the mask. The most of them are saying, "This is what I got to wear. I don't want to wear it, but I don't want COVID either." So they have to be reminded to pull it up or wear it properly. But a lot of the education goes towards the parents. And I was just having a conversation with a parent the other day and talking to them about the sort of just basic science behind this. I think it was an article published in the New England Journal of Medicine that I retweeted on Twitter, and it talked about the aerosol drops and the droplets and how it can stay in the air for a certain amount of time. Smaller, bigger droplets fall to the floor, like when you sneeze, and those types of droplets. if you have a mask on, they did a research study, someone's talking without a mask and you see the droplets, you see it out there. With the mask, you don't see it as much. So that mitigates the risk, that reduces the risk. So having to explain that to them so they can then explain it to their child in layman terms to their child, then most of the children seem to get it. They don't like to wear it, but typically in my experience, and there may be other cases out there where children don't want to wear it, but most of the ones I've seen are wearing it. Again, they may not want to, but they're wearing the mask.
Right. We don't give anyone a choice here at in the medical school and at the hospital. And if I see them, they know they better hurry up and put on their mask, because they're not putting me at risk, because they're putting me and mine at risk, and we don't need it. Let me just take a quick second to talk about, again, our projects that we have here. So if you do need any services, if you like these panels that we bring to you for free all the time, I don't know how I get these experts for free, but somehow I do. They agree to do it. I'll probably have to owe them and put it on my tab later, but I want to thank our partner and our sponsor, the Howard University R&R Project, and also the DC Department of Health on behavioral health. And I have put in the chat the survey. So we really need you to complete the survey so we can continue to get the funds, so that we continue to have these and we can offer the mental health services. So just a little plug for that. That was my little commercial. But back to the questions. People would like to know also from any of you, I guess, and this is something, so I grew up in a family of educators, a mother who's a teacher, aunts who are teachers, and now my younger sister is a teacher as well. And we know a lot about them having to pay for their own supplies. Now, this was pre-pandemic. Now, do you all know if educators are expected to provide their own cleaning products, their own hand sanitizer? Has the college talked about this? Does Howard talk about who's cleaning these things up? For my medical students and my residents, do y'all feel like it's your responsibility, or do you feel like the hospital and the administration are covering these things? Like, is it our responsibility to clean up and do all these things? What are we seeing?
I don't know. In the school of social work, they gave us a little packet of like cleaning, hand sanitizer, wipes, and things like that. I didn't know if they were saying clean your classrooms, but that's what I did with it. I was like, it means clean these desks, hand sanitize in and out, So the school of social work, I can speak for. The leadership has done a lot to help us return to in-person learning. I don't know if it's an expectation. They didn't say it was an expectation, but maybe a subtle hint like, hey, here's your supplies. Make sure you're doing X, Y, Z with it.
Yeah, I think it's the same for the medical school as well. But I've never been given so many little jars of hand sanitizer in my life. I probably have one like in every purse, in every little nook and cranny. They gave us little wipes to wipe things down, but they do have a cleaning staff that pretty much keeps the building clean for the most part.
I will say the hospital provides us resources, the hand sanitizer as well as the wipes. And it's kind of like the onus is on yourself. You have an option, it's available to you to wipe down. It's become routine for us when we enter any of our resident stations or the rooms. But it's nice to have that option available.
Yeah, you should get. Dr. Whitford, I'll say that we have gotten better with that as the pandemic has continued. I know we had some initial struggles and challenges when that wasn't normal. So I'm happy that it is now normal. But in the beginning of the pandemic, it's where am I going to get a mask from? Where are face shields at? Like, it was all types of really struggling and scrambles that I felt was kind of unnecessary. But again, that wasn't our normal yet, but I think now we are normal. So it's like, oh, there's a box of masks over here, there's a box of masks over there, patients put these on everybody as soon as you come in. But it seemed like earlier on, it was like we don't know where we're getting more masks, we don't know where they're coming in. So it was like, I'm holding on to these masks. We know that some people were hiding masks and face shields, and that became normal. So yes, I definitely think that we have gotten a little better. Do you, Monty, know if DC public schools, are they equipping their teachers? Are they ready for this?
They are. They are stocking masks. My school, where I work, actually is providing water, hand sanitizer, and wipes. What I will say is that, and I'm sure the medical staff can speak more to this. They provide kind of the basic surgical masks, which we've all known that with Delta can be inadequate when you're in crowded spaces because of the fit. So a lot of times that's what they provide. So I do think a lot of educators feel it necessary to get their own stuff that may have, be higher quality or have a better fit, but they definitely are providing hand sanitizer, wipes and masks to all educators and even the social workers in the school. Because sometimes the teachers end up getting things at the social workers, but I got a nice little packet. And shout out to Howard University School of Social Work. I am an alum, so I'm proud of my school for providing something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, shout out to Howard trying to keep us alive on most days. All right, so a couple more questions that we have here. Well, this was more of a comment that someone was talking about the importance of boundaries. Now, if you know anything about me and what I talk about, I'm very big on boundaries, and I'm big on everyone's boundaries are different. Like my boundary might be that I'm not talking to you about anything after 8 p.m. Your boundary time might be 6 p.m. You might say, I leave the hospital and I don't answer any questions for anyone. Or, your boundary might be that you only accept a certain amount of projects, or you only accept doing things that really move you, which I definitely believe in as well. How have all of you, each of you panelists, worked on or set boundaries, or what have you learned about boundaries in the last 18 months, particularly for my student and resident, Amina and Dr. Woodford? Like, how are you setting boundaries? Don't set too many boundaries because, but how are you setting your boundaries so that you can preserve yourself and mental health?
I guess for me, it's I have like a set schedule of like when I'm going to do schoolwork, when I'm focusing on school, and sometimes I don't necessarily stick to it all the time, but I just always schedule some time just for me time, where I just think about me. I try not to think about medical school too much because it gets real down here, but definitely just making sure I schedule in just that time for me, and like phones off, just me, myself, and I. That's definitely like one of the things I've been implementing recently.
I support that. I need to try to be like you on that, because I wish I could not think about medicine sometimes.
I would say for me, I've tried to be firm, intentional, and consistent. So with being firm, it is important to me, then everyone knows it's important to me, then they're likely going to respect it's important to me. So I'll say, this is a time, I set a timer. This is the time that I have for myself. After these 15 minutes of me being able to decompress from the day, then this is my family time. When I'm talking with my family, that's not a time for work. So usually I'll say, okay, during this time with my family, any other time that I have that is designated for other things, then I'm okay with being able to think about medicine. Especially with me studying for my upcoming boards, it's really important to be very firm as well as intentional. I'm planning everything, writing, and then I think the more consistent that I've been, the more beneficial or helpful it's been for me, because then it's like, oh, I did that, and I can continue to do it.
Yeah, sometimes setting boundaries makes you feel better. I definitely agree. And there has to be different levels and sets of boundaries, because you also need some boundaries at home. You need boundaries at home as well. So I need people to lower their expectations when we are over here providing education, mental health care to people. Like we need to change some of these expectations that we have at home as well. Like, are there ways that you set boundaries at home? Monty, do you have to do that, or what happens?
Ooh, I do. My rest and relaxation looks like Netflix in my bed by myself. And everybody respects that, right? So the way I set my boundaries is that we have family time. And usually that would be on a Friday night, maybe even on a Saturday night, watching movies, hanging out together. And then when I'm tired and it's time to rest, and I try not to take it personally because my kids call me a grandma when I'm sleepy at 9 o'clock. But when I'm tired and I rest, and they respect that. They allow me to go. And sometimes that looks like I said, just kind of vegging out on movies by myself, or sometimes it looks like going to sleep. But I communicate when I have hit my wall, and everyone knows that that's time to let mom rest.
That is very important. I also, in the mornings, I don't like people to talk to me, and I just need to have like my specific hour, like 7 to 8. No one talk to me, okay? Like, I don't want you downstairs with me. I don't want you sharing the kitchen space with me. I don't want you standing by the microwave with me at the hospital or at home. I need, I'm an introvert. I know I'm out here hosting all the time, but I'm an introvert and I need to build myself up for all this interaction that I need. So I feel you with the at-home boundaries for yourself, and the mom boundary as well. They call me a grandma too, and I don't care. Dr. Kendall, what boundaries are you setting over there?
Yeah, so I admit I struggled, especially as a first year academic. I come from the practice side of social work. I worked in the hospital for 8 years, 7.5 to 8 years. And joining the Howard staff, I had to carve out my own lectures, and I felt this pressure to just say yes to everything. So I was being asked to present here and do a lecture here, and I was like, yes, I'll do it. Just kind of fit in. And it bled into the family life. I'm at my desk for long hours, and my fiance is like, you've been at your desk all day. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. So it's something I had to learn. So this academic year, I feel like I have a core as far as my lecture goes, and I have to carve it out from scratch. So I'm able to dedicate. I'm purposely dedicating more time to family. So right when I get home, spending time with my son, the family, that's important to me. So it's definitely a learning. It was a learning curve at first, but now I feel as though I'm better at it.
Yeah, let me tell you that, because I've been here a couple years longer than you, Dr. Moody over there. Mm-hmm. Howard will do that to you. Academics will do that to you. That's why that's not what this talk is about. But you will see a lot of burnout in young Black faculty across the country, and we have seen, because there's so much that you have to fight for. So many people are asking you to do this, and also you're trying to be successful for yourself. You're trying to get your lectures together. You're trying to learn how to really just master and teach. And then at the same time, there's this impact of representing and showing up for your students, for yourself, for your community, for your ancestors. And it's actually a lot of weight on you that we see in academics. So learning that early on is very helpful. It's not something that I can even say that I've mastered now. I just have to try my best. Let me just give we got a great shout out over here. And a shout out to Dr. Woodford, that this has been a wonderful panel discussion to see all of our Black community doctors and social workers speak. But he said Dr. Woodford is his favorite. But I don't know. They have the last name, so I don't know if there's any bias there. Same last name. And I have to say that I've had a great time with these panelists as well. Again, the survey is in the chat. Now, I'm going to ask everyone one last question, and this is from one of my family members who texted me. I don't know why we can't just put it in the chat, but how has, as we think about returning, how has vaccination hesitation or hesitancy impacted our mental health as a community? Now, both for those who are worried about taking the vaccination and those who are also, upset and angry about those who will not take the vaccination. Do we think that this hesitation is impacting our mental health, Is that just part of the new normal that we all have to get used to? What do we think, experts? Last question for y'all.
I definitely think it's impacted our mental health. I think that there is a lot of pandemic fatigue, and it has created frustration among those people who are vaccinated and are judging people who aren't vaccinated because we just want it to be over, right? A lot of the people that I know personally have chosen to get vaccinated. I do think it's a personal choice, but I also feel like it's a public health issue. And I think a lot of people kind of have that same sentiment where they have, they want to respect people's choices, but we tired, right? And we want to get out of the situation that we're in. And that's created a lot of anxiety and polarization, right, among people who love each other and care about each other. And I think that we have to recognize it for what it is, which is, again, we're all kind of hitting this wall. We have some pandemic fatigue, and that's impacting our patience and our tolerance of people who feel differently about things than we do.
I definitely feel you. I think that we've seen pandemic fatigue in two different ways show up, like those who are tired of people not doing the right things, and then those who are tired of being in the house, tired of following rules. They just want to go outside and do things. But, as Monty said, it's a public health issue. Other thoughts about how this vaccination hesitation is affecting our mental health?
So over the summer, I had time to actually help vaccinate patients here at Howard when they had the vaccination clinic. And one aspect of just the mental gymnastics that goes into the whole vaccination talk is how it kind of brings up the distrust that a lot of Black people have in the healthcare system and how they have to constantly think and ruminate on that. So that was one of the things that stood out to me a lot. And those were a lot of the conversations that I had with patients when they came to get vaccinated or came to talk to us about why we're vaccinating people. So that's one thing I think is important to consider.
I can't wait till you get to my service. Yes, ma'am. That is something that we really have to think about. And that's something that I talk about all the time. We are not without history. We are not ahistoric. And people say, oh, these are rational fears when they are not irrational when you literally know people. And I don't mean just Tuskegee. I know people like to highlight that. And I don't think people even know what happened in Tuskegee, but that's for another day. But when there has been experimentation on young Black kids around psychotropic drugs in some Baltimore premier institutions and also in New York. Also, experimentations on Black prisoners, things that have happened recently. We have to understand that there's a reason why people have this mistrust. They've been disrespected and disregarded for quite some time. So you do need to explain things to people. You do need to tell them who was involved. You do need to answer their questions before they do this. But does that excuse people from not participating? No, again, that's on your personal level. But we do need to realize as people who are in medicine, who are in public health, who are in social work and education, that there's some real feelings and real history behind this. Dr. Woodford, what do you think? I
will say that the pandemic fatigue, the mistrust, the dynamics between the family members, all of those things are certainly, we're seeing an impact in the healthcare of the patient. So when the patients are coming into the unit, or when we're seeing patients in the hospital or even an outpatient clinic, those things are reflected. And I found that a lot of patients aren't doing as well, either coping or being able to fill their medications, or we're seeing more patients come into the hospital as a result of the fatigue, and then also with the hesitancy with even vaccination, because it may cause changes in the family dynamics, as well as just impact them overall. So I will say that just in general, I've seen changes within our own healthcare as it trickles down, or just the lasting impact that it's had for us that we've noticed.
Absolutely. It is definitely affecting the way that everyone approaches services, the way that we see people let things go on and on and on because of a fear of coming into the hospital. People who have things that are seen as routine now are becoming acute because they haven't addressed it or they haven't been able to get appointments. We can say that Dr. Woodford and I can say from our service that we've seen patients in the emergency setting that normally they would just be outpatient and it would be okay. But now it's exacerbated. It's gotten so bad because of all, a multitude of reasons. It's multifactorial, but being afraid to come to the hospital, not wanting to talk about things, and then things just get worse and worse, and then they end up in a dire situation in the emergency room with us.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Kendall,
Mm-hmm.
I think are you our last one to tell us about how you think now we're adding pandemic fatigue, hesitancy, systemic and historic racism are all impacting mental health.
I mean, it's all of that, right? You had the dual pandemics, as I like to say, in the COVID-19 and systemic racism. And then, the mistrust. I mean, you just hit the nail right on the head. I had a student remind me about the experiments that they did on Black girls in birth control. So it definitely has an impact on the mental health of specifically the Black community, where they haven't had the greatest experience, to say the least, with trusting medicine and experiments and these sort of things. But I get into this sort of, and personally, I get into this cognitive dissonance where I do trust the medical field and science, but I do understand where they are coming from when they say, I just don't know, they put it together too fast. And it was put out, even though I know doing some of the research is how it got to be developed so fast. So, and wanting, like I said, personally, I want my son to spend time with some of my family members, but a lot of them aren't vaccinated, right? So it's like, oh man. So you get into this feeling of sadness and just being creative in how we can all interact during this time. I'm curious though. I'm curious how this turned into a political debate, as some folks on different parts of the aisle say, oh, we're not getting vaccinated, so how did this turn political? I thought this was, I thought we were American, as they like to say, I'm American patriot, but you don't want to do what's best for all Americans. It doesn't make sense to me. That's something to also think about often.
Definitely the mistrust is real. I wasn't even going to go on this tangent, but the mistrust is real. And even as a physician who is Black, who researches a lot about the history of, particularly in psychiatry, but in medicine, period, of the way that people have experimented on and disrespected Black folks, I understand that I teach my residents to question, and students as well, to question things, like question that diagnosis. Why is that patient being diagnosed with schizophrenia? What is the evidence? Like, what is happening? Because no, I don't trust everything that we see people do, especially when I don't see any folks who look like me on these treatment teams. And I teach my students and my residents to know that, so that they also have the ability to question things as they move forward. And random shout out, I actually am working on something, a podcast that really examines the history and current issues of experimentation, racism in medicine, a podcast coming out. I'll bring that to y'all in September, but it's called The Next 72 Hours. That made me just remember that I should talk about that, just bring up the mistrust and what's happening. So I would like to close out, but we do have one I just want to address right here. No, we already talked about boundaries. I'm sorry. Brown Girls Embrace, that you live in the DMV area. Suicide prevention awareness is coming up, and we will be doing something for that in September. You can connect with us via social media, of course. Just know that it takes a little time to get back, but we will find your messages, any of us, and also at Black Psychiatry on Instagram and Twitter. If any of my panelists want to come back at any time to talk about anything impacting the mental health of the Black community, students, educators, campus life, any of that, medical education, please come back and join me. It has been great to have you here. And also remember that if you are a healthcare worker or a Washington, D.C. resident and you need mental health help, it is free, free, you don't have to pay, through the Howard R&R Project. And so you can reach out to us that way or through the survey. We are all trying to work on returning to the new normal. I don't believe that there is a normal. I never really believed that there was a normal, but what we had previously I don't believe that we're going back to that. We have to adjust to new ways of things. If you don't have on a mask, don't come by me. All right, but anyway, thank you to my lovely panelists. I am, again and always, I am Dr. Harrison Danielle, a doc named Danny, and thank you so much to my wonderful panelists for joining us today. Thank you for our participation, for all the wonderful comments. I didn't even get to go through all of them. We will have this up for you, of course, on our YouTube channel, and follow us on Instagram so you know when our next talk is. We would love to work with other people in the community. And thank you to all of our panelists. Good night.
Good night.